Okay. Hello to doctors Michael Mantell and Darin Davidson. It's great to be together. We've worked together on this mission of, I sort of joined your mission to help physicians and caregivers overcome burnout and overwhelm during these stressful times, and then focus on optimal and higher level performance. So I just thought it was a great time to put you two together and just have this conversation, because until I met both of you, I really wasn't aware of how dire this situation is and how hard you both have worked for so long, that this is not just a pandemic situation. So I just wanted to sort of shine a spotlight on the fact that the medical system has been broken for a while, and now it's coming to the forefront a bit more because of pandemic. But what are your thoughts and insights? And maybe you can explain a little bit, like, what is the state of affairs for physicians and caregivers these days?
Darin, you're the medical doctor. I'm the psychological person. So
that means I go first.
You go first, sir.
Yes, and Darin, will you introduce yourself briefly first?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks very much for putting this conversation together, Sandy. I think it is a very important one to have. And, you know, as the three of us have talked about this before and been involved with some events and all, I think it's great to bring people with different backgrounds and different areas of expertise into a issue that really does need different perspectives and different aspects to be able to make everything better. So just a quick introduction. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training, but my big interest and passion is about bringing essentially the skills of human high performance into the healthcare realm for healthcare professionals, and by virtue of that, their patients, their families, their friends as well, with the idea that these are the skills that allow us to be at our best for ourselves, for others, but are also the same skills that help us manage, hopefully prevent burnout. And so it's very intertwined, really, those concepts, I think, of high performance and burnout. But to get back to the original question about the burnout issue, I think it might be helpful to begin with, well, what is burnout and you know, what leads to it? Because it's not just something in healthcare, it's something that everyone can experience. Burnout can happen professionally at work, burnout can happen at home in parental roles, it can happen basically in any of our roles. And one of the best ways of thinking about it that I've come across is that burnout happens when there is an imbalance between the resources that we have, both internal and external, and the demands that we have placed upon us, both internal and external. And when the demands are higher than the resources, burnout is something that can come to play. And burnout ends up becoming something of basically extreme exhaustion, physically, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, a loss of joy in whatever the role is in which we become burnt out, and almost a detachment from the joy of that role and the performance of the tasks of that role. And so in specifically the healthcare context, you have a profession where the demands are very high, in that there's high stress, high pressure by virtue of what it is. It's inherent. You know, you're looking after other people, you're looking after, depending on the area of practice, life and death situations, quality of life situations. Regardless, it's high demand. There's high patient volumes. There's lots of demands coming from the patients, from other healthcare providers. So it's coming in different directions. But it's also a group of people that by their nature are, you know, quote unquote, type A personalities. So we also put a lot of high demand on ourselves and high expectations on ourselves. So that's the demand side. The resource side, people might think of the healthcare system as being highly resourced. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot of people involved. But when you really narrow down onto the healthcare professionals themselves, the amount of resources to support them may not be as great as it may seem. And while there are other people to help with the work, ultimately it all ends up with the responsible party. And that basically takes away from those apparent resources to the point where the number of external resources aren't great. And also, in order to support people and help them develop the skills to manage all of this, you need external resources. And those, in many instances, are lacking, if not non-existent entirely. The internal resource side are things that we'll talk about, perhaps like our mindset, our breath work, our meditation practices, nutrition, sleep. And those are concepts that most healthcare professionals are never trained in. They're not exposed to. And so they frequently don't have a well-established practice in any one of those areas, let alone all of them. And so it really is a setup where you've got lots of demands, internal and external, resources not enough to match those demands, both internal and external, and burnout can be a real issue. And one thing I really want to highlight that you said at the outset was that this has been an issue for some time. While I think the awareness in the general public is much higher because of the COVID pandemic, this issue existed long before COVID. It will exist long after COVID unless something's done about it. So this is not just a temporary problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you know about it firsthand. So now, are you also practicing or just consulting to help doctors right now?
So my area of work right now is really just consulting and coaching to help bring these skills into the healthcare field, for not just for physicians, but for physician associates, nurse practitioners, really any healthcare professionals, because everyone really faces the same situation. But I'm not practicing in a traditional sense.
Okay, and Michael, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and then how you two connected?
Okay, well, it's sort of difficult to follow that incredible introduction to this whole field. I've been a psychologist for 45 years. I retired from the practice of clinical psychology a number of years ago and have continued to do behavioral coaching and cognitive behavioral coaching specifically. Maybe a decade ago or so, I became very interested in the patient experience, following the Cleveland Clinic and other major organizations, Mayo and so forth. And in working in physicians' offices and hospital settings, it became clear that the patient experience was one thing, but the physician experience was a whole other issue. Behind the closed doors, I saw firsthand real stress. Now, stress is, in a sense, too much going on. Burnout, in a sense, you're left with too little to give. So we have this difference. But particularly since COVID hit over the last year and a half or so, we've been hearing much more about burnout. And I have always been involved in the field of integrative well-being, wellness, whichever you want to call it. Wellness being mental, physical health, well-being, taking into account a variety of other things. The field of psychoneuroimmunology, a term that was first coined probably late 70s by Robert Ader, A-D-E-R. He worked with an immunologist, Nick Cohen, and they did some fascinating studies. But they looked at the interaction of psychological and physiological processes that affects the body's ability to defend itself against disease. So in my work with physician well-being, physician wellness, I take what I learned actually from Darin, a phrase that I first heard him use. Maybe others are using it, but I only have heard it from him. And that is top-down interventions and bottom-up interventions.
Not an original phrase of mine, by the way.
That's original, right?
Not of mine.
It's not of yours.
I picked it up from somewhere too.
That's how I learned about it, from Darin as well.
Okay, so we're giving credit where credit is due. We always have
so much.
Well, but top-down interventions, when we bring our skills to bear to help physicians, are on meditation, mindfulness, focus on thinking, a big area that I look at, and emotions, and the neurological correlates in turn influence the endocrine system, the nervous system, with ulterior changes in the body. Bottom up, center on breathing, something that you, Sandy, are the expert in. Physical movements such as yoga and Tai Chi stimulate the nervous system, the immune system, the endocrine system, resulting in changes in psychological states. So when we talk about top down, we also talk about what organizational changes can be made. But my approach is that while we're waiting for that organization to change, which could take forever, and we have seen organizations that are that, are like those ships out in the sea that are not moving. But while we're waiting for those organizations to change, we have physicians and nurses and healthcare professionals and their family and their friends who need help. And that's, I think, what the three of us are all about. You asked me, how did I meet Darin?
Yeah.
Darin and I go around on that.
I'm not sure.
That's so
And we
funny.
forgot.
Well, you're a great pairing. I've learned so much from you. And I think that this conversation is about helping to empower people to take control. And we are talking about physicians specifically at this moment, but the three of us have talked about how taking control of your mindset and energy and doing that top down and bottom up, meaning using mindset tools that then will affect your body in the way that you want your body to feel, or vice versa, shifting your body, using your body to send messages to your brain, right? So it's all about being able to better control what's going on internally, and reacting or responding more mindfully to external stimulation, right? But this works for not only doctors and caregivers, but entrepreneurs, leadership in business, and really anyone.
I want to give you an example real quickly. I had a client yesterday, a woman who's in healthcare, but that's not the issue. Her brother is staying with her, and he's a mess. He doesn't do the dishes. He doesn't clean up, and she's pulling her hair out. I sent her a simple question. What does his leaving the dishes out, the dirty dishes out, have to do with you harming yourself? Or as my mother and grandmother used to say, Michael, what are you worrying about? You're going to make yourself sick. They were the first psychoneuroimmunologists.
Right. Literally, yeah.
But the point is, while we're working on these systems that are clearly broken, we have people who are breaking as a result, and we need to do something. Another thought about all this is, Darin, in terms of seeing people, physicians particularly, who are grieving through this process. And you look at what's her name, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and you look at the stages she has, and we see people living through these stages. Oh, this hospital's fine. It doesn't affect me. Oh, the virus isn't going to affect me. Then you hear people in the next stage of anger, who are just so enraged and pissed off and spitting and blaming. It's them, it's this, it's that, it's this. They don't take responsibility. And then bargaining. Okay. So if I just do this, this, and this, and then everything will be okay. And then they get into that stage of sadness, where I think many people are right now. Physicians, nurses, healthcare pros, they're just, this is never going to end. How am I getting out of this system? Until they finally get help, whether it's top down or bottom up, to accept what's happening. I think those 5 stages provide a model for how to look at where people are and how we can intervene.
Yep. And Darin, why has this been going on for decades and decades? That I can't believe that doctors aren't taught during medical school something about self-care, mindfulness.
Well, I wish I had an answer for why, because then we could perhaps solve the problem much faster. But I think ultimately we are all, and by we, I mean healthcare professionals, physicians, whatever term we're using, are basically taught and trained from the start that it's all about looking after your patients. And people will hear about the nobility of the profession, the altruism of the profession, and so forth. And that is all very good. It's very important. Clearly, it's a profession that does emphasize looking after others. The difficulty is there's never been an emphasis on, in order to do that to the best of your ability, you need to be at your best. Because if we're not, how could we possibly be anywhere near our best for those people that we're trying to look after? But the paradigm has always been, be it in medical school, oh, you need to see as many patients as possible, do as many procedures as possible, what have you. And, oh, you were up all night, but stay late and do this extra thing. It'll make you better. Actually, it won't. It might give you in the short term something that makes one think they're going to be better because they've gotten a little bit more experience, but how much of that can you possibly take in and really learn from and really improve from when you're physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually exhausted? And I'm not sure anybody knows why this is the case, but if one looks back in the history of medical training, and this is going way, way, way back to the beginning of things, you find people that were in leadership roles at the time that perhaps had some substance use issues that were not necessarily helpful. And there's stories about some of the pioneers of the concept of residency programs. I'll come back to the story, but as a little indicator of all this, why are trainees after medical school, but before starting their practice, called residents? Well, way back when this idea was started, you lived in the hospital. You were a resident of the hospital. That's where it comes from, not a particularly good paradigm for promoting self-care. At any rate, and the story goes that this person had a cocaine issue. I won't say addiction, but issue. And so this person would work for hours and hours on end because they were using and didn't conceptualize that rest and time away and sleep and all of this would be necessary because of all of that. And how much that leads into this problem, I'm not really sure, but I can definitely say when I talk with physicians who have not yet seen the importance of these issues, and I talk about self-care or sleep, recovery, time away from work, you get a lot of blank stares about, well, but what about the patients? I need to look after the patients. And the truth is yes, we do. And in order to do that to the best of our abilities, we need to make sure that we recover following a stressful day or a day in which there are high demands placed. Otherwise, we can't be at our best. And that's the work, is to try to get that recognition to become more common amongst physicians and healthcare professionals.
Sandy, if I can just add to that.
Yeah.
I mean, Darin, you're always so in depth. That's just incredible. I just want to add from a psychological perspective, the physicians that I talk to have a hard time admitting that they need to step back a bit. So I have helped them reframe. So there's one person, a gastroenterologist, who needs time out. He says, I can't work half time. And I said, don't think of it as working half time or taking time out. Don't think of it as treating a weakness. Think and treating an illness. Think about it as instead adding health to yourself. Let's not worry about you're broken. You're not. But we want to either treat illness, fix, or prevent. In other words, build health. And as a model, I'm finding that more physicians can resonate with yeah, you're right. Yeah, working this many hours helps me be better, as opposed to I can't work full time anymore. And admitting that weakness, there's a barrier to physicians to listen to this, because many of them live in that denial. Burnout is a weakness, and I'm a failure. No, you're not. Not at all.
Yeah, great point. And I feel like the time is right today for this conversation, because don't you think that we are sort of as a society now talking more about weakness? This is not a weakness. This is about well-being. And now there's up to the minute fascinating science about sleep and mental health and all of that. So I think that now, are you both seeing that doctors, physicians, caregivers are more open to the idea that, you know what, you're right, this is not a weakness. This is silly, that this has been the system for so long. Do you see any change from the, people like Ariana Huffington keynoting the Ending Physician Burnout Conference, and she's been such a leader in sleep, and the conversation about sleep and well-being and self-care. It really is top of mind right now in corporate sector and other sectors. Do you see it at all infiltrating into the medical sector?
That's hard to answer. It's very difficult to answer because on the one hand, you see it being talked about by more physicians, but of course we don't, like, I don't have a sense, is that just because these are the people that have now seen this and have been exposed to it, and once they have, they're kind of on board with the idea, versus there's so many more people now that are being exposed to it. So you get into this sort of selection bias kind of thing. I think what I can say with a fair degree of certainty is that the emphasis that is placed on these issues in the business world, certainly in the competitive sports world, and in others, is not the same in the healthcare world, not by a long shot. So even if things are better, we're still really far behind those other domains.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important that I know that both of you are trying to get the message through, like, don't wait for a crisis to, don't wait for the melting point, the burnout, before you hit the wall and think about self-care. And I think that's the important part, is to have these conversations so that you can catch people before they actually get to that exhaustion of burnout.
Every physician knows if she or he or they accidentally cut themselves and they just deny, oh, it's no big deal. That could become infected. That could become a serious problem. Why wait? We don't blame the knife. Well, if there wasn't that knife, this wouldn't have happened. And while we're blaming, we're being infected. And that's just it's another model that I bring to this. I hear a lot of coaches talking about what needs to be done to help physicians. I hear a lot of physicians talking about how the system needs to change so that they don't have to do anything. And I think it, as Darin says, it is this model that we have to bring. So I believe that when we see more physicians and healthcare professionals in these conferences, not the coaches, but the actual people providing service who are feeling the pain and willing to talk about themselves, the organizations too, then I think we'll make some headway.
So if somebody sees this recording on LinkedIn and they have a friend who is a physician or an ER doctor or a regular practicing in private practice doctor, what advice would you both give to help them, become more self-aware of the importance of self-care and well-being, especially in these times?
I'm going to let you go ahead with that one, Michael.
Well, I'll tell you, what I would not do is do this. I would not point a finger. I wouldn't say, you're suffering and you need to do something, and here's my diet, here's my prescription. No, that's not it. I'd put my arm around this person figuratively. I'd sit next to them and look at the world that they're looking at. Right now I hear so much about what's going on, and I'm wondering, how are you handling it all? I would rather than tell them, I would ask. I might even suggest sharing a little bit, not much, of your own issues, because it's not about you, it's about them. But I think it's how to reach out with compassion and with empathy and being there. Hey, let's set up a coffee or go out for a beer kind of thing. And the more you're together and the more you talk, perhaps you'll begin to hear more. Unless, of course, you see serious emotional distress. That's different. But that's one approach I would take.
That's great. So basically just reaching out to people that are overwhelmed at the moment and just connecting with them.
Asking how you can help. I don't think you're going to hear, well, you can get rid of the electronic health records, you can see more patients, that's not the answer. How can I help you is often meant as, I don't know what to say to you, but rather, these are tough times. I keep reading about what's going on in healthcare. What's your experience with it? Boof, you'll hear it.
Good. So it's important to ask these questions and spark the conversation.
Mhm.
Darin,
Darin.
what's your thought?
No, I totally agree with that. And I think the other thing to add is to really give them, in a sense, an invitation, permission, however you want to think of it, for self-compassion. Because I think a lot of physicians that get to the point of realizing that something's wrong, they may or may not recognize it as burnout, but realizing that something's wrong, blame themselves. Because the appearance is, well, everybody else is coping, I'm the only one. And I think that, well, first off, that's not true, because self-reported surveys, as have been talked about for several years now, show that well over 40-50% of physicians self-report many symptoms of burnout. So one is not alone. They are not the only one. But getting away from that blame, self-blame and self-criticism, I think, is really important. And I certainly wouldn't start by saying, well, here are the things you can do. You can start this practice, this, that's not helpful at all. I think giving them space to express what's going on and to recognize that they don't or should not blame themselves for it, and to kind of start there and hopefully help lead them to a place where they start to add in those different practices for themselves and for everyone around them.
Fortunately, there are healthcare medical organizations that do provide a lot of support. The American Society of Hematology in December is having its annual conference, and they have a 3-day program called the Physician Wellness Studio that we'll be presenting at. And it's going to be packed with nothing but tools for physicians who are interested in stopping by and getting 10-minute microbursts of a quick look into self-compassion, breathing, you name it. So there are organizations that are aware and they're trying to help, and that's a good sign. I know that the three of us bring to these places a wealth of experience and knowledge, and the integration. Look at this: the breathing, physiology, the meditation, the mind. This package is it. This is what psychoneuroimmunology really is about.
Yeah, I'm honored to join your mission. I feel like we do have this, we've created like a trifecta that really covers so much. And so will you let people know how to reach out to you directly, each of you?
Sure. I can never remember social media handles, but LinkedIn is the best one for me. And then you can also reach out to me through the website that I have, which is just my name, darindavidson.com. There's a contact form on there if people want to reach out that way. Those would probably be the best two.
I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. But I invite people to write to me directly, Dr. Mantell, DrMantell at me.com, drmantell@me.com. Follow me on social media. Let's connect and get together.
You're both such a wealth of information and so relaxing. Every time I talk to you both, thank you for being such great mentors and for sharing your insights and advice with caregivers and physicians. And it's just such incredibly important work these days. So I hope to have more of these conversations and answer any questions that might come in later via LinkedIn. And thank you both for the work that you do, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for being such a great professional colleague and good friend, Sandy and Darin.
Yes, thank you guys as well. It's great to combine all of our expertise. As you had said earlier, this is the way it needs to be to bring about the greatest chances for improving things.
Yep. All right. Talk soon.
Okay. Thanks.